Well, welcome. Today, I will be speaking to the topic of losing frame amongst men and why most modern men, most younger men these days, seem not to be able to find their true north. Now, let me start by perhaps identifying a number of observations that I have made over the last few years. And I think this observation is manifested in something that has happened in Europe over the last 7, 8 months. Specifically speaking, the conflict we can see between two European countries. I'm speaking specifically about Ukraine. For many years, especially over the last 30, there has been an attack on the masculine frame, particularly and specifically in the West. So much so that most men, by any modern standard, have lost a sense of their true north, what it means to be a man, and where they fit into society in this modern age. A lot of what we have seen over the past 30 years is an attack on masculinity and manhood. So much so that the whole concept of toxic masculinity was put forward by a number of people, promoted very heavily by a larger group of people, accepted and adopted very sadly by men, few though. And what we find across most of the modern West are weaker men. But the altercation and the escalation of things in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, over the past 7 months has highlighted the role we play in society today. At the start of the war, or what I think some people generally refer to as a military conflict between Ukraine and Russia, we noticed an interesting observation. There was a law that was passed, a proclamation, a declaration that said all men had to remain in Ukraine, and women and children, rightly so in my opinion, were allowed to leave. At the core of that message was something that had permeated the male psyche over the past thousands and thousands of years. That message was that men, you are expendable. You are to be replaced. You are supposed to sacrifice your life, your health, your freedom for the greater good. Prior to the 21st and even the 20th century, there was a compensation given for such tasks. Men were called to greatness, the willingness to die for what you loved, to die for those you loved, family, country, legacy, your tribe, your ethnicity, and your nationality. And the reward for that was most men in general, we were esteemed. We were esteemed and we were recognized for what we were. We were not labeled as toxic. We were not labeled as aggressive. We were not labeled as the oppressors. We were seen simply as men. the group that you could call onto at any time, whenever the chips were down, the group that would always put others first, the group that would sacrifice their lives and their future to preserve the lives and the futures of those who were in whatever group they fell into, but who were strong, weaker than the strong. And the last 30 years, particularly from the 1960s, especially in the West, we have seen almost a coordinated effort, a coordinated attack on masculinity and manhood. So much so that most men these days, we've lost our frame. We have lost our true north. Most men are lost. We lack purpose. We lack vision. We lack discipline. We even lack the core backbone that we need just to survive as men. Many of us have gone to the extreme position of wanting to behave less like men and more like women, because we have also been encouraged to express our emotions, to not be competitive. A lot of the things that made us men have been labeled as animalistic, aggressive, undesirable, and we have been encouraged to shun such pursuits. Now, in the same period of time, what we have found is that we've made the West a lot more peaceful. If you go back to the Great World Wars, you are looking at roughly 85 to about 95 years since we had a war. So the West has been relatively peaceful, so much so that we've lost a sense of the importance of strong men. We've lost the sense of the rarity of what it means to be a man. And the Ukraine-Russia escalation was a reminder. The women and the children were allowed to leave. The men were forced and encouraged to stay and fight. To fight for the land, to fight for the preservation of the tribe, the ethnicity, and to fight for the women and children who had left. Now, let me make a statement before I move on from, and I move to today's theme. At the end of all of our endeavors, none of such sacrifices will be rewarded or will be celebrated. In not too long, in the same country, you will hear the womanist feminist ideology, like a goldfish having a memory of a few seconds. The same people who were protected, the opposite sex, the weaker men, will resort again to demonizing and vilifying strong men. So we have seen a loss of frame over a number of years. We have seen what used to be, a non-negotiable true north. We've seen such positions being debated. The South is now called the North for men. The East and the West are seen as potential Norths. And so most men are lost and confused. When trouble comes, we find ourselves behaving in manners which are not consistent to how we should. Now, there are so many reasons. And I've seen this, and this is partly why I began today's session. I have seen this manifest itself, particularly in intersexual dynamics, interactions between men and women. I think you see this the most, the loss of frame, the the tendency for men to expect burdens to be shared, the expectation that all men are the same, and the hierarchy amongst men is something to be, I guess, rooted out and abolished, put away. We have seen men behave more like women, and we have seen women behave more like men. There's been a role reversal for whatever reason. Men more likely in the West have this desire to be loved, to be liked by the opposite sex. So much so that we have thrown away most of the non-negotiables that we once used to have. Most men these days have a feminine disposition. Now, I should also make it very clear that men and women have more similarities than we have differences. If you were to plot the characteristics and the traits of both men and women, what you find is that there is an overlap of similarities, much more so than our differences. However, at the extremes, those differences matter, because those differences really identify our uniqueness as men and our uniqueness as women. We are certainly more the same than we are different. However, if you were to think about this as a bell-shaped curve, and the extremes were to be sliced out, and what you have is the middle are our similarities. Put those similarities apart and put them aside and focus on the extremes. Those extremes is what builds society. Those extremes is what makes nations remain despite invasions from adversaries and despite attacks from enemies. Those extremes is what builds a legacy, pursues a goal, pursues a dream, embraces failure, refuses to settle for anything but the possibility of success. Those extremes are so important that when we make those extremes comparable or similar to the median or the average, what you find is that society starts to disintegrate because men lose frame and forget who they are. They become weak. They become despicable and contemptible as men. Most men today are encouraged to express their emotions, more so than in any time in history. Now, I don't intend in this short session to go into the benefits of being emotionally intelligent, a word that irritates me these days, more so than many other words. Intelligence is important. The ability to express your emotions as a man is important. It's important to also recognize that there is a time for everything under the heavens. There's a time for everything under the sun, and there's a season and a place for everything. There are times when you should be stoic in your mannerisms and in your behavior, and there are times when you can be less stoic. A mentor of mine said that if a father remains on the floor with his child and plays for too long and does not stand up and assume the right frame, a time will come when the child starts to see the father as the same as him. We play different roles, and there are times to play the role of compassion and empathy and sympathy. There is also a time to be stoic. Generally speaking, men these days, we are weak, especially in the West. Um, I should say that I am still in awe, and I am still very much optimistic about men overall, because when I look to the East and when I look to the South, I can see men who have maintained their frame. Now, it doesn't mean that all of their values are things I share, but I still see men who believe and who understand what it means to be a man. Now, in the game of interracial, intersectional interactions between men and women, you get to see the loss of frame even more. Today, we are, and I mean we as men, there is a need to please a woman, so much so that most men will give up their dreams. Most men will sacrifice their birthright. Most men will give up greatness just to have the affirmation, not the touch, the affirmation, the praise, and the recognition of a woman. Never in history has this happened. There's been a change of the psyche amongst men. There are many reasons. I'll share a few. And as I speak to you, I'd like you to think about yourself and ask yourself the question, does this apply to me? And if it does, think about how you can get yourself back on frame. JP says, stand up tall with your shoulders straight. Jordan Peterson. In other words, face the world with a frame that understands the challenges ahead, that understands the vicissitudes of life, and with such a frame, have the audacity, the tenacity, the willingness to embrace the suffering that comes with such a frame and the suffering that comes with the wind. Generally speaking, I have seen more men behave very quite disappointingly in their interactions with women. And I have identified a number of reasons for this. Number one, generally speaking. Now, I should perhaps begin by clarifying something. I'm speaking in general terms. It doesn't apply to everyone. So I'm not saying all men. When I use the word men, I'm talking about the majority. You only need 51% to be in the majority. You actually need 50.1%. So if this does not apply to you, I wish you all the best. But generally speaking, men have not discovered their purpose. They haven't discovered their sense of being. They haven't identified their why in life. They don't have a calling, and therefore they do not have an assignment in life. And what that means is that we are always drawn to artificial praise or praises, or we're looking for ways for us to feel important, even when such positions could be contrary to our purpose and our calling. So the first reason why most men lose frame is because we do not have a purpose. We haven't discovered our purpose in life, or we do not have a purpose. Two separate things. Your purpose is the reason why you were born. A purpose could be something that you find a meaning in, and something that propels you either as a preparation phase, a preparation process, or a training ground for your ultimate purpose. The key component is that you are moving progressively towards a goal, and you're pursuing that goal purposefully and with intention. Not by mistake, not by chance, not by luck. Intention. That's the first. Most men have not fulfilled their purpose. Now, the second reason why most men lose frame, especially relationally, is that most men have not failed enough in life. I have talked about the importance of delaying certain decisions, particularly delaying the most important decisions that we will all make as men until a certain age. Part of that reason, the reason for this is because we need time, first, to learn, secondly, to unlearn, and thirdly, to relearn. Most men go through different phases of life. From when you are young up to about 18 years, you're still dependent on other people. From 18 and above, 18 to 35, you become dependent on yourself, which is when you sow the best seeds in the crop or in the ground. You sow your best crop in the soil of your imagination, and you bring some of that imagination to fruition. And then 35 and above. So, for most men, failure occurs and should occur in the first phase, and it should occur at the right time, in small doses, consistently, and progressively. So that by 35, you have experienced enough failure to understand that the path of least resistance and the idea of giving up on your dreams is a non-negotiable, is out of the question. The lack of failure means that most men, unfortunately, are afraid of being called losers. So we will select things and goals that sabotage our future because there is an instant gratification or praise that comes from someone that we find desirable. Hence, you will find amongst most men, we will pursue instant gratification from a woman and sacrifice our goals, our dreams, therefore losing frame, rather than paying the price, staying faithful to the goal, staying faithful to the dream, and failing your way to success, whilst maintaining the desire and the ability to move from one level of failure to the next level of failure without losing both your frame, both your integrity, and enthusiasm. Most men have not been taught what life is about. And primarily, the reason for this is because most young men today are raised in families where there are no strong men. They are raised in families where there are no good men. They are raised in families where in the community and in the family there is an absence of good, strong men. Most boys these days are raised in single parent families. Others are raised in families where their fathers were the first generation of the feminist and the womanist movement, where they saw their fathers vilified, demasculated, and so they replicated what they saw. And therefore they became, feminine men, weak, despicable, contemptible. Now, There was no doubt they were kind, they were loving, um, they were very expressive emotionally. They believed in sharing everything equally, including areas that were supposed to fall within the ability of men without question. Some of these men were raised to be this way because they were called toxic whenever they expressed any form of disagreeability, any form of aggression, any form of dissent, any form of physical expression. And so most of these men were raised to be weak. Another reason why most men have lost their frame is as a result of a lack of success. Most people haven't achieved their goals. And for most cases, and in most cases, most goals have been set so low that it doesn't evoke or arouse the greatness within you, that desire, that love, that longing to be better and to be more. Now, I have said in many videos in the past that it's important sometimes to set your goals so low that you cannot fail. Like most things in life, there is an opposite to that, which is if you do not set your goals high enough, you will always fail. I'll give you a different example. There is an aphorism that says that there are no such things, or there is no such thing as a free lunch. The opposite of that says the best things in life are free. When I make reference to setting your goals low enough, the purpose of that is to say that when you begin the journey of manhood, from 17, 18, 19, and prior to 17, 18, and 19, what you need is incremental improvement, which means your goals should be set at a level where you do not experience failure too early, too soon, so much so that it breaks you. It's important to begin and take small steps. And as you develop confidence, self-assurance, self-discipline, and you develop self-mastery, and your self-identity begins to form as a result of your accomplishments, you are supposed to increase your failure tolerance to much higher levels, where you now begin to attempt goals that are slightly within your reach, but perhaps also out of bounds. Because growth begins at the point where you stretch beyond your position or your frame of comfort. Most men have not failed enough. And part of that reason is because there hasn't been someone explaining the process of failure and the journey towards success. There are no role models for most men, and therefore it becomes hard. Now, one of the things I should also say, and I don't mean to beat modern men up in this session, I am a product of most of what I have shared. I had to learn, unlearn, and relearn. It's a lifetime of self-improvement, personal development, and professional development. But the first thing I had to do was, first of all, see myself naked with all my flaws, with all my brokenness, with all the areas of my life that I could recognize were inadequate. The second thing I had to do was surround myself and put myself in places amongst people who could look at my blind spots and tell me that perhaps my windscreen, my side mirror, is quite dirty. People who could encourage me and inspire me to bigger goals, bigger dreams, but more importantly, people who could hold me to account. Accountability partners. And what you find in most men these days, we look to the opposite sex and the opposite gender for our affirmation. We do not look to other men. History has several accounts that shows that the group men, we decide your value, we decide your frame, we decide your hierarchy, and we decide when and who we submit to. Not you, the men, the group. In today's society, what we have, or what we find, is that most men are looking to women for affirmation and for encouragement. And this has to stop. You have to get back to your frame. Find a few people out there, pick up a few books. I would recommend to most men that one of the worst ways through which you can develop yourself in modern society today is through podcasts, social media, and what I call the instant gratification approach. You have to do it the hard way. Push yourself away from the table, pick up a book, find a few mentors, find role models, pay for the support and the advice you need, and do the work. Do the work. You are going to have to unlearn, learn, and then relearn what it means to be a man in modern society. Now, I should also say this. You will come across a lot of adversity as you begin that journey. You will be called names. It's important not to lose your frame. Stay the course. Remain true to your dream. And remember, there is a purpose for everything under the sun, under the heavens. Your purpose may not be known at this time, but it doesn't negate the existence of that purpose. Wherever you are, you might be in a place where you're being prepared for that purpose. But wouldn't it be sad to arrive at the destination of your purpose and not have the skills, the talent, the gift, the frame to fulfill that purpose? So begin today and look forward